Welcome to the Green Wasp Removal YouTube channel. This is part one of a two-part episode about a very large yellowjacket nest located at a trailer camp out in a very remote location in the countryside of northeast Indiana, USA. The foragers were all over the camp. They were stinging people and irritating people and landing in their drinks and all kinds of chaos. So it took us a couple of days of inspecting this whole camp till we finally located this massive nest that was underneath a trailer inside the electrical cavity space of this trailer. It was a huge nest with a giant population, a lot of foragers coming and going from all sorts of different crevices and cracks in this lower part of the undercarriage of this trailer. Most of it was zeroed in on this one electrical panel that they had used as a main entrance. There were thousands of yellowjackets all over this nest. So we initially set up an attrition collection where we just started collecting a lot of the foragers that were flying outside of the actual nest itself. Anything that came out of the undercarriage of that trailer, we decided to focus on that and just collect them all for venom immunotherapy. And over the course of 3 different days we visited this location, we were able to collect all of the foragers. And eventually we got the Boroscope cam out, and we took the scope cam and we put it up into the cavity, and we saw just a massive nest in there. Everywhere we looked with the Boroscope cam, we found more and more paper, more and more nest, wasps all over the place, and they were dug in deeply into this cavity all around the electrical wiring. So it was actually a fire hazard for this camper, and it ended up being a pretty urgent job to get this cleared out of there. So we spent 3 days there total at this site. First 2 days just collecting the outside foragers that were flying, and on the 3rd day we went in and we cleared out that entire cavity, and it was a massive nest. A lot of comb, a lot of paper, lots of brood inside the nest still, a lot of brand new queens that had been born, a lot of males being born, because it was the end of the season. It was early November 2024, and they were in the reproductive phase of this nest, and there was a huge number of them coming out of there that were queens and males as well as workers. So it was a very, very busy nest. Here in part one of this episode, we're going to show you the first 2 days of collection and how that process worked. We'll take you all the way through from the initial inspection day where we went site to site, camper to camper, and we just scoured every inch of that property until we found this nest. Then we'll show you a couple days of the attrition collection that we were doing on this nest and show you that whole process. And then we're going to have part 2 of this episode where you'll see us pull the entire nest out of that cavity. So we hope you enjoy this process. It was a very interesting nest to do, very challenging, awkward spaces to work in, and a little bit dangerous due to a couple different factors we'll talk about. But it ended up being a very successful removal. It was actually the last removal we did for the 2024 season. As you ride along with us, please remember to like, share, subscribe, and comment to let us know you're there. Enjoy the show. November 2nd, 2024. We have some yellowjacket activity. You can see one right here. Looks like maybe German yellowjacket. Fair amount of damaged wood back here that would attract them, but I don't see more than that one. Took off before I could grab it for a specimen for species, but we'll find another one here shortly probably. So we captured a specimen here. Looks like Germanica, Vespula germanica. Try to get a closer image here. There's another one on the back of the shed. Got activity at the corner of that window. You see one right there. But it looks like another random stop more than a active nest. November 5th, 2024. Yellowjacket nest underneath the camper on the 5th lot of the first row. Very active nest, a lot of foragers still, mostly coming in out of this access hole right here. We're seeing activity over on this side too. You can see them right here. They're removing larvae. That's what they do this time of year because the larvae are starving out. That's definitely Germanica. A lot of activity still. A lot of foragers coming and going. So let's start sucking up some of these. And then after we reduce some of the population that's flying, we'll get the scope cam out and take a look in there. So as you can see here, this was a very active nest. We could tell right away this was going to be a huge nest that took up literally the entire cavity underneath the front part of this trailer where the electrical access panel was, and somewhere up in there we knew that there was going to be a pretty monster-sized nest because it was so active even this late in the season in early November. It took a couple of days to locate this nest because we were seeing individual yellowjacket foragers all over several different lots in this park, and we just had to go inch by inch, shed by shed, trailer by trailer until we found this nest. Collection's going well so far. We were seeing quite a number of new queens in this nest, and also we were capturing males out on the initial inspection day a couple days earlier. We had found males out floating around in the various lots on this park, so we knew they were very well into their reproductive stage, so there were a lot of new queens and a lot of males being born. All right, so we've been collecting for about 15 minutes. When you're in a relatively tight neighborhood where there's a lot of residences right up against where you're working, like there is in this park, we had to make sure that we dealt with swarm control first because there were reports of people being stung, and we didn't want to make a swarm that would really bother and go after the neighbors. Even though this time of year, this is a mostly summer camp, so it was pretty much abandoned for the year, but there were still several lots that had people inside these campers and using their spaces, so we did not want this swarm to get out of control. So it's November 5th, 2024. Kind of a dark and rainy day today, windy, but still a lot of wasp activity at this location, which is a trailer camp. So when you work in an environment like this, there's a couple of concerns about safety you want to be very careful about. Number one is just tear risk. There's always something that'll snag your suit or your veil and expose you to a lot of stinging wasps. So you have to be very, very careful about all the debris that you're working around, number one. And number two, when you go out into these country environments where there's a lot of dogs just wandering around, you have to be very careful that you don't run into a dog bite scenario, especially with the vicious breeds, pit bulls, larger dogs that can really do some damage. We always carry some type of weapon just to be safe. If you don't have bear spray, some kind of hardcore pepper spray, hunting knife, taser sticks, whatever you got to use, something on you to protect yourself from a vicious attack, you may well get seriously injured because dogs react very negatively toward humans in unusual clothing. When we're wearing bee suits, we look like a bunch of space aliens that just popped out of a UFO, and they just freak dogs out. So you got to be ready for that. You really do, especially if we're unleashed dogs. The reason we bring this up now is because at this site, a large unleashed dog came right up on us. And as soon as it saw us, came around the corner, it just started freaking out, barking, growling, getting very upset. If you're working in areas where there's a lot of strays or abandoned dogs, and you see that a lot out in the countryside. in a very rural environment where if you do get attacked, you're on your own for a significant period of time before there's going to be any EMS or emergency response to help you. We always tell clients to keep their dog leashed, to keep the neighbors' dogs leashed, and that's not always controllable. Sometimes there's just dogs in the neighborhood wandering around, regardless of what type of prep work you try to do. Bottom line is you just got to be ready, be self-sufficient. So as you can see here, there were multiple entry points for the Yellowjackets that were coming into the underside of this camper. And there tends to be one main entry point, but there's also a few other spots that they will use occasionally on these very large nests. So rather than try taping the entire bottom of this camper, which was just pretty huge, we decided we're just going to focus on this one main entry point and just collect through attrition for a while before we opened it up. And that seemed to work fine. So after a while on this first collection day, we started to see a somewhat of a reduction in the number of foragers coming and going. So we decided to get the scope camera out and look inside this undercarriage cavity to see if we could find where the nest was located, or at least where the bulk of the brood was. Boroscope cams are absolutely essential in this type of work. If you're trying to locate a nest inside an inaccessible area that only has small openings, these cameras are fantastic. They're just fiber optic cables with a camera on the end that you can insert into any inaccessible areas to locate the nest. Great for when you have to remove material off a wall or a ceiling so that you don't take out more material than you have to. They're also great in situations like this where we're just trying to look at, before we open up, say, an access panel, we can see what we're getting into before we open it up. These cameras have bright lights on the end of them so they can see really well in dark spaces, and that was very handy here. We didn't have to look too far with the Boroscope cam because the nest was right there. It filled the entire cavity, and it was actually all wrapped around multiple different electrical lines and wiring, and so this was actually a fire hazard for this camper. Wasps that live inside cavities, like yellowjackets, they like to chew away whatever material is in their way. So if it's fiberglass insulation or if it's wiring, they may even chew away the insulation on the wiring itself. So you need to make sure that you get that material out of there. All the nest, all the brood, all the flammable wasp paper material especially, all the queens you can find, any workers, it all has to go. So if you're doing this as a professional or if you're doing this just as a civilian DIY kind of thing, you may get rid of all your wasps and think you're done, but don't leave any of that material, especially the paper stuff that could be flammable. So here's some of the scope cam footage. As you can see, there's wires passing right through the center of the nest. They're actually using the wires for support for the combs in the nest and for the paper in the nest. And as we looked around with the scope, we were very interested in actually seeing the extent of the nest in the wiring, because that's a danger that we have to report to the client and make sure they're aware of. Pretty much wherever the Boroscope lens was focused, we found more wiring covered in more paper and debris. It was pretty extensive. And it just doesn't matter what type of wiring this is, what sort of lights or other electrical it's connected to. All we know is you don't want anything like this around any type of electric, just in case there's a short or a spark, anything that could cause a fire. It's just not worth it. You want to have this put up on a lift in a garage and have a mechanic actually clean this entire thing out and put in some fresh electrical wire, ideally, after we get all the wasps out. This is why it's so helpful to have a scope cam in our kit of tools, because we can literally take a clip of this, text it to a client and say, hey, you've got some serious issues here that need to be addressed, ideally by a mechanic who specializes in this type of wiring, because it's significant enough that the client can't see this themselves. They depend on us for this type of report. So it's nice to be able to use the tools like this to get that type of imagery that really let them understand the extent of the issue. Because this nest just went on and on. Wherever we looked in there with the scope cam, there was just more and more material, more and more wasps. As you can see, they were going crazy on the light, trying to attack it and sting the light on the camera. That's why they keep blocking the image on the lens, but that nest was extensive. And all of the follow-up work that's going to be necessary on this thing, they're going to have to replace some insulation, they're going to have to replace some wiring maybe, or at least clean it up really well. All of that work is going to have to be done by people. And part of the reason why we don't use toxics and poisons in any environment like this is because whatever poisons you contaminate this whole environment with, some poor guy's going to have to get that all over them when they're trying to do work to fix this thing up. So it's just no good. You don't ever want to use poisons in an area where people are going to be directly handling that space. It just doesn't make any sense to poison people along with everything else you're trying to kill in there. So for all you DIYers out there who want to try this on your own, just get a shop vac, put some soap and water in it, suck all your wasps out with whatever small tubes or larger tubes you want to attach to your vac. Once they're all out, you can go in there and clean up with no poisons around. So one thing about these scope cams that have a bright light on them, the wasps hate those bright lights. They immediately attack them, and they will cover up the light so it can be difficult to see, because if they're attacking the camera so hard, they get in front of the camera while they're attacking the light, and they're trying to defend their nest very, very viciously. So they're really going after that camera. So just be aware every now and then you got to shake the camera a little bit to get the wasp off of the lens so you can see what you're doing. This can be especially aggressive if it's an aggressive species like southern yellowjackets or eastern yellowjackets. They go absolutely nuts when you put this light into their nest. German yellowjackets, on the other hand, is what we're dealing with here. They will attack it, as you see, but they're just not as aggressive, but all of them will react to the light. Fortunately, these boroscopes are pretty tough. They're made to go into areas that are dirty and problematic, but the wasps themselves, they can't really damage it. They can try spraying the lens with venom or something, but you can clean it up. No big deal. So as you see here, it didn't take long to get a significant number of the foragers rounded up and collected, but we knew there was a whole lot more work to be done here. We still had foragers landing and crawling all over the place and entering underneath wherever they could. So on jobs like this, you just lay back, you get comfortable, and you know you're in for the duration. It's going to take a while to get all these foragers that were out and about all over this park. They're all coming back in, trying to get back to the nest, and that's just a matter of time. You just have to put in the professional time to get it done right. That work ethic pays off ultimately, because you'll have fewer trips you have to make to come back to this site to finish the job. And there are people involved here who may have venom allergies, who may be getting stung in the places they're trying to live and relax. They're depending on you to do a good job. So as a professional, you got to keep that in the forefront of your mind in everything that you do. Here we're going to slow the footage down a little bit, and you can watch these yellowjackets coming in and assessing that there's something around that hole that they've been using into their nest that has changed. They see this potential threat here, the vacuum device, and they try to stop short of it, figure out what's going on, try to find another way in sometimes, but ultimately we collect them because they can't help but going back to the same entry point they're used to using. So eventually, as long as you're consistently keeping your vacuum device right by that entry point, you're going to collect them over time. You can see them bouncing off the device. That's how they assess it, and they check what it is and how it reacts to being bumped, and eventually they'll just get hit by that suction stream and brought right into the collection device, and then you've got them. And then they can be used for venom immunotherapy, and that's the point of collecting them. That's why we take them alive, and then we'll freeze them, and we'll keep them for the season. And at the end of the season, we ship our frozen stock out to the biomedical labs that make venom immunotherapy products for people with severe wasp venom allergies. So they go to a good cause. So it was starting to get a little dark and cloudy and windy on this day, and it was getting late. So on this first day of collection, our main focus, as we were saying, just is about reduction of the main problem this park was having, which was a lot of foragers out all over the park stinging people. So on the first day of collection, we completely reduced that problem. And now we could focus on coming back on multiple days, and eventually we'll go into that camper and pull the whole nest. But this first couple of days, we're definitely going to be about collecting as many of the live foragers as we could, both for venom immunotherapy purposes, but also just to reduce the massive problem that the park was having because of such a big nest with so many foragers. We had removed hundreds of them from the area on this first day of collection, and it was getting pretty dark and windy, so it was time to wrap it up for this particular day. But it was a good collection day. And the bottle was getting full enough that it was time to go ahead and get these frozen. And so we took a break to go and freeze these wasps in CO2, which is dry ice. And that will preserve their venom for biomedical use in the most efficient way. November 6, 2024. We're back at another attrition collection where we see a lot of activity on this yellowjacket nest that we collected on yesterday. Got several hundred of them out of there yesterday, maybe 1,000 or so. Today we'll do the same thing. Attrition collection because we can't get access to this panel because it's closed with a key. So once we get a key access, we can go in and get the nest. But for now, we'll just collect the foragers from here. Looks like they're entering from a couple of spots, both by this hose that goes up there and also by the black piece of metal you see in the background. They're going up that section there as well. So there's still plenty of activity around this camper. You can see them swarming. So on the second day of collection here, we had fewer collected than the first day, which is a good sign that we're starting to dwindle this population down to something manageable. So we wrapped it up here for the night. It was starting to get pretty chilly, and few of them were flying out of the nest because of the temperature dropping. So we decided to come back a couple days later and finish the job where we actually open up the entire cavity underneath that camper, and we'll show you what that nest removal looked like in the next episode, part 2. Thanks for watching.